of power and control by giving her the knowledge, information, and support to use technology in ways that support her safety. But the program model also has two halves, and these two halves are basically relating to the device, which is on the left-hand side of this diagram, and the training and advice and resources, which is on the right-hand side of this slide. And the two halves are part of ensuring that that program is provided as safely as possible and that there aren't any unintended consequences. So on the left hand, we have the provision of the handset, and this is a brand new 4G smartphone. It's brand new because we want to ensure that it works and that it's in good working order and it doesn't have any missing parts or charges. It also ensures that the device has never been owned or used by anyone else and there's nothing residual on the device. And the reliability of that phone is absolutely paramount. It may literally be the difference between whether or not she reaches help and can call for help or not. We also know that many survivors are experiencing financial abuse. Justine also alluded to that. And so the phone comes with a SIM card and prepaid credit, and three additional top-ups are available each financial year. Justine also mentioned that Telstra has a dedicated team that's called the SAFE team, which are a group that are trained to answer the calls and understand some of the dynamics of domestic and family violence. So they can ensure that when a survivor's details are updated, that any device or account that they're registering isn't inadvertently or automatically linked to any previous account controlled by the perpetrator, for example. And so they can also make sure that everything is set up clean, fresh, and not connecting. And that for those women that leave violence without their identity documentation, there are also some special arrangements in place to ensure that she can get a phone up and running, but still has 90 days to get her documents, her identification documents in order. In Australia, you cannot get a phone without providing a certain number of points of identification. We have no access to what we call burner phones here in Australia that is legal. And so being able to set up a phone and get a phone running when you've left violence without your ID documents, or you're potentially a woman on a temporary visa whose identity documents are overseas, having 90 days to be able to get that document and provide that so that you can keep the phone services going is very, very valuable. So on the other side of the program, WesNet has a team of staff funded by the Australian government through a funding grant, which we're very grateful for, which manages the program. And that includes managing all the stock orders and the shipping of all of the boxes across the country, as well as developing and providing sort of phone support and training and resources to all of the network of participating agencies. So the team trains workers from all of the agencies in the network annually and also updates the resources on the public-facing tech safety website, as well as a dedicated website for the agencies that's more specific for frontline workers. We also have co-advice appointments for frontline workers who need additional advice or support for when they're working with clients with more complex tech abuse needs. So this diagram basically shows a schematic of how the program sort of works on one level. So Telstra donates the phones to WesNet, and we have agreements in place with individual agencies that are able to provide case management and meet the other eligibility requirements. And we're able to do that and have a team here at WesNet because we have funding from the Australian government. So it's a real three-way partnership here. WesNet sends out cartons of phones to all of our 231 agencies at the moment, and they send their staff once a year to our training so that they can keep up with all the different ways that phones are being abused and know how to safely provide a phone to a survivor. As I said, we've got 231 agencies. We're about to expand, which is great news. And we have a whole range of different services in our network. So we've got community legal services, we might have women's specialist domestic or sexual violence services, women's health services, or a whole range of other services. For example, we have hospital, emergency and social worker departments on our books. At the end of the day, the agency then has a stock of phones in the cupboard, train staff who know how to give out a phone, and stock on hand so that there is a brand new phone in a box waiting at the agency for the next woman who walks in and requires a new phone. Back to you, Jo, to talk about the training in more detail.
Thanks, Karen. So the training we do under the Safe Connections program is called Smartphones and Safety. And it's really about the nuances of tech safety planning and transcending tech abuse so that workers can plan appropriately with their clients when they're giving them the Safe Connections phone. In Australia, most frontline workers are very concerned that they don't feel equipped to support clients who are experiencing technology facilitated abuse. So what the training looks like under the Safe Connections program is 3 hours in total, with 1 2-hour workshop and 1 1-hour workshop that we run in the same week. The workshops are ideally delivered face-to-face to everyone in the organisation. However, for the past few years, and particularly now due to the pandemic, we have been delivering the training by online webinar. So workers attending the sessions are mostly from our Safe Connections agencies. So these are the agencies distributing the Safe Connections phones. And like Karen said, they're from a range of different services. So domestic and family violence specialist services, but also the program's been extended to include other kinds of frontline services that regularly come into contact with women experiencing violence. So family services, women's legal services, court advocacy services, sexual assault services, and many others, just general community services as well. So in the training, we're exploring the different ways abusers misuse tech. So I sort of ran through that before with the common abuse scenarios of the smartphones. So we do that in more detail. We then also go through how to strategize for safety, tips for documenting and gathering evidence, the requirements of the Safe Connections program, so the administrative requirements, and also the tools and resources we point the workers to that are most relevant when they're working with clients in this space as well. So if we look at each topic in a little more detail that we've got on the screen there, the training can include going through what tech abuse on a smartphone can look like and how abusers misuse phones. So like I ran through before, the most common forms of abuse earlier on a phone, we take the data from our research and we would go through those 3 forms we went through plus more, and then what it can look like and what it can sound like. So we would go through destroying or limiting access, harassment, monitoring and surveillance in more detail and give examples of what we've seen in our work as well. So frontline workers have a good idea of what it can look like. We also go through documentation and evidence collection. So looking at the purpose of gathering evidence, where to look for it, how to gather it, and how to store it safely, and then how to present it. And in the training, we also talk about why we might do this. So possible reporting mechanisms for survivors experiencing tech abuse and specifically phone facilitated tech abuse. That doesn't always necessarily mean reporting to the police. Only it can mean reporting to a platform and also in Australia to a government oversight body as well. We also, as we can see there in the bottom right quadrant, run through the administrative requirements of the program, so such as logging and reordering phones, the reporting requirements, frequently asked questions, and then also where to access the most relevant tools and resources that are linked to the program as well. And in the safety planning component of the training, we look at what a tech safety assessment involves, why it's essential for client safety, and how to incorporate a Safe Connections phone into that client safety plan. This is arguably the most important component of the training. It's what actually makes the Safe Connections smartphone safe. The worker who's trained in tech safety and how they safety plan with their client so that they make safe decisions about their new phone. And in the process, they're educating survivors about how to remain safe on their tech whilst they continue to use it long term. So it's just so much more than handing them a phone and then being like, okay, now you have access to a safe phone. It's really about doing that initial safety planning and then also providing that education so it flows out in a long-term capacity. And that is really to keeping on our mission, which is to keep women connected on their tech in the safest way possible. And the training content around safety planning under this program is what makes the program really effective and safe. So because that is such an important component of the training program, I thought we could take a look at a few example slides of what we would include in our safety planning training under this program. So on this slide, we're looking at defense strategies. So this is a common slide we would run through in the training with workers. So it's just useful at helping them look at options that people can engage in if they've experienced abuse through their phones. So and it can include taking stock of the abuse, muting and or blocking the abuser, securing accounts. That's often through changing passwords or changing the email address linked to the account, reporting the abuse, where to go to report it, how to report it, and then maybe starting over with new accounts or devices as well. So in the Safe Connections training, we run through all these options in more detail. So frontline workers would understand the benefits and risks of each option and could then go through them with their clients. And then their clients would make a decision about what options they feel are best and safest for them. We explain in the training to the workers that survivors might choose one, a combination of, or none of these options. And it will really depend on what she wants and needs and her own unique safety plan. And her safety plan is going to depend on her unique set of circumstances. So the types of abuse she's experiencing, her context and level of independence from the perpetrator, and also his perpetrator patterns, including how he will react, especially if he feels like he's losing control. So we go through that, those options in the training. And then we also go through, to follow on from that, how to do a safety plan with a client. And that's really about looking at assessing risk. So this is one of the slides from our training, and it's designed to assist frontline workers by suggesting some possible questions they can ask their clients in relation to the possible risks that might come up when they provide them with the new smartphone. So it's really designed as a helpful start to the safety planning process. So if we look at some of those questions, what are your worries or concerns about getting the new Safe Connections phone? What do you think he would do if he found out you have a new phone or a new number? Do you think he might monitor your new phone? Has he ever tried to locate you using a phone, account, or other technology in the past? Based on how he's been in the past, if he notices you've removed him from your account, what do you think his reaction would be? She's going to have really strong and good and clear ideas about his likely responses, to these questions, and also how safe she is to get the new phone, and once she has it, the safest way for her to use it. So we talk about that there is no checklist in the tech safety planning process, because that would be assuming that if you were to go through the list, you've covered everything off, which in the world of tech, you just can't do. And that wouldn't be safe to go through the checklist and be like, yes, we've covered everything. She's now totally safe with this phone. It's really about acknowledging that everyone's situation is different and to look at the main forms of tech she's using and also what he's done in the past. So if there was a possible risk or concern, the client is worried about the abuser finding out they have a new phone number, which is often the case if a client still lives with her abuser, then this can lead into discussion points. So a safety plan can be developed around this particular concern. And some of those discussion points might be, where can she keep or hide the phone? Who will she tell about the new phone or number? And would they tell him about the new number? If she updates her new number with services such as Centrelink, so social welfare, or her bank or other accounts, so email or social media accounts, could he find out about the new number? What is her plan if he does find out about the new phone? So thinking about, is that a possibility? Is she concerned it's a possibility? And then running through those questions with her. Another possible risk or concern might be that the abuser might monitor the new phone, or if this has been a pattern of behaviour in the past. So discussion points around that might include, will he access the phone physically or remotely? What has he done in the past? Where can the phone be hidden so he doesn't know about it and doesn't have access to it? Sometimes that can mean hiding it at a safe person's house or a friend or family member's house? Is she worried he'll monitor the new phone? Does he have the ability to access it remotely? Would she feel safe to put a passcode on the phone? And will he be able to monitor the phone through access to apps and accounts and other services? If so, is she comfortable locking him out of these accounts by changing passwords? So it's basically thinking through what ifs and the likely outcome if she's to do certain things. And then going through the most used accounts and services with the client can also be a really useful way to start the safety planning process. So looking at her Apple ID, so iCloud account, Google account, email accounts, social media accounts, and also bank accounts and other apps and services. And you're really looking at those things that she's using the most and accessing the most. So in the training, we explain the tech safety planning process isn't a checklist. It's really more about starting a discussion and asking the right questions, as the survivor is going to know best what tech she uses the most and also the abuser's patterns. And I guess that also comes up with a range of challenges in the tech safety planning process, which we also go through. So lack of information about how tech works may lead victim survivors and workers to overestimate the perpetrator's ability, which can lead to unnecessary re-traumatization. So basically giving the abuser more credit than they deserve. They can often seem more tech savvy than they really are if you don't really understand how the tech works, or how they could be finding out what seems like a lot of information and hacking into everything when really he might have just opened a device and accessed her email. So sort of thinking, just not understanding the tech in that way. Sometimes a lack of information about how tech works can mean what a survivor is reporting sounds like she might be confused or paranoid, which sometimes can be the case, but often it's a symptom of gaslighting tactics and lack of knowledge about what the technology is capable of. And also, if workers don't understand what the technology is capable of, it can also sound unbelievable. It can often be quite difficult to identify exactly what tech is causing the problem, because everything is so connected and so many of our accounts and devices store so much information about us. It can be hard to narrow down exactly what tech is responsible for that. And then untrained workers could expect survivors should close all communication channels with perpetrators or get off all their tech, when in fact survivors will often have a few communication channels open so that they can see how he's traveling. They might be able to tell where he is or what he's doing, and they can plan appropriately if he starts to escalate. So often survivors are remaining on their tech, remaining in communication with him as a safety strategy themselves, and they're best placed to be making those decisions about their own safety, as they know his patterns the most. And then one last thing is that tech can be intimidating as it's constantly evolving. And if someone doesn't understand it or understand what they are working with, it can feel overwhelming. It does feel overwhelming at times. And us at WesNet, we're always learning new things and trying to stay on top of everything and updating all our resources, but it moves quickly. So it can be that feeling of just feeling like, oh, I don't understand this. I'm feeling overwhelmed by it. But if you kind of take a step back and ask those initial questions I went through on the slide before, the opening up of the conversation, it can become quite clear quite quickly what might actually be going on, and narrowing it down that way. So we go through all of that quite a lot in the Safe Connections training with the workers, and that is probably one of the things we focus on the most, the tech safety planning when you're giving out the phone. So this quote by Eva Galperin explains why a one-size-fits-all approach to tech safety planning is not appropriate. So it's very hard to give broadly applicable security advice to victims of domestic abuse, because every victim has to judge how much independence they have from their abuser and whether or not taking action will cause them to back off or spur them to even more drastic action. So safety is achieved through strategies, not a checklist, because every survivor situation looks different. So in our training for frontline workers, we explain this about the safety planning process and provide them with questions and resources that can help them to determine how an abuser is misusing a particular technology, and then what they can do in conjunction with the survivor to try and mitigate that risk or stop that abuse. We also explain in the training that it's the survivor's decision about how she chooses to remain on her tech. So the workers can provide her with options and as much information as possible so she can make an informed decision, because we want to give her back the control and the power in her own life, as this is what's been taken from her. And looking at the training under the program, our survey responses have shown that 93.2% of attendees feel more confident to advise clients about technology abuse, so that they had an increased awareness of tech-facilitated abuse and strategies to enhance safety, increased confidence working in this space, and we're having more formalised and targeted conversations with women about their technology safety, and also starting to really incorporate that aspect of technology into their safety planning as well. And we just had a couple of quotes there from people that had completed the training as well up there on the slide. So I've been able to apply this training in my safety planning and discussions about technology abuse and domestic violence. So really good responses there about practically incorporating that sort of knowledge into their work. So in an evaluation of the training for frontline workers, it was shown that the training really is having an impact on how the workers are practicing. So immediately post-training, approximately 98% of frontline workers said that they did feel more confident in advising clients on how to address tech-facilitated abuse after participating in the training. And also by accessing our WesNet resources on our website. There's so much information in our handouts on that website that often we direct the workers there first, and that is also a really good first point of call and knowledge for them when they're assisting clients as well. And as part of the Safe Connections program, we also provide advice and information to workers who are working directly with survivors experiencing tech-facilitated abuse. So we have over 3,000 workers on our portal. We have over 1,815 emails seeking help in 2022, so last year, 280 tech abuse cases in 2022, and 4,426 calls to our 1-800 number last year as well. So the numbers that we're getting back show an increase over time, and also an increase in the complexity of the matters that we're seeing. Because if the tech abuse is too complex for a worker to try and figure out themselves and safety plan with their client, then they will call us for further advice and support. And in cases where the tech abuse is even more complex and it can't be resolved in that initial call, we'll also schedule co-advice appointments between one of our tech safety specialists, the client, and their frontline worker as well. So all the stats in all those categories have been going up as the years go on. On that note, I'll pass back over to Karen, who's going to talk about the impact of the Safe Connections program.
Thanks, Jo. So I might just talk a bit now about the impact of the program. Sorry that this has got a lot of information on it, but it just provides a bit of a summary of the impact of the program on one slide. So to date, the program's actually provided over 36,000 women and children with a brand new phone. And so that's between 400 and 600 phones going out to women every month. I think one of the key components that we've seen through the program is that it's supporting women from marginalised groups, particularly those from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, which are a very low proportion of the population in Australia, but are actually accounting for about a third of the phones going out. We also have quite high numbers of women who identify as immigrant, refugee or non-English speaking background, and also women with disability. We've just given you some of the sort of the different demographics there. So the age distribution of women, so women do tend to be, the most common age groups are sort of 26 through to 45. We are providing way more phones in one territory of Australia, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And you can see there the average number of phones given per month. We have really noticed a bit of a drop since COVID because many of the frontline agencies sent their workers home and they didn't have access to the phones in the cupboard. So we're starting to build back up in terms of the number of phones going out. And we're very delighted to have our program extended by the Australian government for another 4 years from July this year, which is great news. One of the things that we've noticed about the program is that the Safe Connections program is reaching women in geographically more remote or isolated locations across Australia. So proportionately more women from non-metropolitan areas are getting phones compared to how many people are living in metropolitan cities. So particularly in our outer regional areas. So you can see in this graph here, around about 68% of Australians live in metropolitan or major cities of Australia, but only 36% of the phones are going. And conversely, only about 1% of Australians live in very remote Australia, but about 8% of the phones are going out there. In Australia, we have a major survey called the Personal Safety Survey, which was run last time and last time it reported that women living outside major cities at the time of the survey were much more likely to have experienced violence from a current or previous partner since the age of 15. So it's 23% in like 1 in 4 outside major cities compared to 15% in major cities. And police and crime statistics in Australia also show that women living in rural and remote areas are much more likely to experience higher rates of domestic violence. And this is borne out by the hospitalisation for domestic and family violence data that we have in this country. And it shows that, you know, somebody who lives in outer regional Australia is 3.4 times more likely to be hospitalised for domestic violence. But this increases really dramatically. So it's 16.6 times more likely in remote, if you live in remote Australia, and 45.5 times more likely in very remote Australia. And you'll see that we are giving out way more phones in the Northern Territory, which is the NT. That is a very remote part of Australia, has quite a high population of people from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island communities, or Aboriginal communities, the Torres Strait from the Torres Strait. But yes, so this shows that the program's actually getting through to those communities of need. So we also have been asking and talking about, you know, why women actually might need a phone. So there are sort of a wide variety of reasons, and they're often overlapping. So their phone might have been damaged or destroyed or stolen by the perpetrator. Her current phone might be compromised because the perpetrator is using it to track her through either a built-in app or a piece of software that they put onto the phone, or because he owns it and therefore he can see where all the calls are made. It might have been taken by police as evidence. So they need, and that phone might very well be with police for 6 months awaiting trial or longer. So they need something in the meantime. It might be that she doesn't have a phone, she's never owned a phone, can't afford a phone, but it's will be the way that the service provider can then get in touch with the client. It could very well be her only link to the outside world. And I had one client who had a Safe Connections phone solely for the use of a mandated family court order, which said that the perpetrator must have contact with his child every day. So there was a mandated call that had to happen between 6 and 7 p.m. every night. And so she used a Safe Connections phone for that call. And the phone just lived on top of the fridge, and it was turned on at 6 p.m. and turned off at 7 p.m. And it meant that the survivor never had to give out her new phone number to the abuser, and he never got to find out what the new number was, and he couldn't harass her on it. And in the meantime, she could just turn it off so that there was none through the Safe Connections program. We've also recently started collecting information about where women are actually sort of situated when they're receiving a phone. And so this just shows the leaving status, like where were they? So 64% of the women receiving phones had already fled. Another 9% were planning to leave. 8% were at home with the perpetrator still, but they were sort of managing to get or hide a phone, or they might have a phone that was ready for when they were about to go. And 19% were still at home, but the perpetrator had been removed. So we have programs in Australia that remove the perpetrator from the home and leave the victim survivor at home. We also asked about the frontline workers' assessment of what the risk level were for all of these women. And 59% of the clients are considered to be at high risk of violence or future violence. 35% were at medium risk, 5% were at low risk, and 1% had a historical risk, may have required a phone because of lack of finances or some other implications. So we had the program evaluated some years back, and the evaluation found overwhelmingly that the women interviewed felt that the Safe Connections program had had a really positive impact on their lives, and they were very satisfied. Most women explained that due to their financial situation, they would not have been able to afford a new phone if it wasn't for the Safe Connections program, and they would have continued to have felt isolated, vulnerable, and unsafe. So here we've got a quote from Charlotte. It said, "It was useful because I didn't have the money to go out and purchase another phone to still be able to contact whoever I needed to. When you're trying to run and hide, the last thing you're thinking about is trying to get a phone and get it all organised." I think that's one of the other aspects is that, when you are in a crisis situation, there's a lot of things going on, and anything that we can do to sort of reduce the burden of those administrative tasks you've got to do to try and stay connected really helps. So this highlights that the Safe Connections program reduces the burden on women to access safe communications during the crisis. The convenience of workers in the family and domestic and family violence sector having the free, ready-to-use mobile phones available on site is also a really big strength of the program. So having a new smartphone combined with empowering technology really enables women to just feel safe. This is a quote from somebody who received a phone. She said, "I can sleep better knowing that he isn't tracking me." So she's able to give up her other phone and just know that he wasn't able to track her. For Gemma, the Safe Connections phone meant that her children and her were not tied to a landline when they called her ex-husband each night, which made them feel safer. So Gemma said, "Phones are very, very easy to trace. He's found us over and over again. Whereas now that we have a Safe Connections phone, it's only turned on for the duration of the call, and the call's made in the car. And once we hang up, we move. It gives us that added layer of anonymity and manoeuvrability. So really terrified of being located by the abuser." So the Safe Connections phones allow women to re-establish relationships with their family members and remain connected. And many of them, had not been in contact with family members during the abusive relationship and sort of expressed real gratitude that they could finally talk to a beloved family member. Kelly said, "He used to isolate me from my kids and he didn't let me talk to them. So I can just relax and start talking to my kids properly. So that's been good." Having a Safe Connections phone also means that women could contact police and other supports really quickly should they need to. And this is, often built into safety planning. And this is why a lot of women are given phones. Women also appreciated being able to use their Safe Connections phone flexibly to suit their needs. For example, many women gave their phone to their children to allow them to communicate safely with their father. And for Susie, a Safe Connections phone just meant she felt safer. It's been really handy if I'm out and about anywhere and I'm needing the refuge to come and pick me up, or I feel scared or anything. I can let the refuge know what's happening and they're able to come and get me. So it's, again, really important to know that the reason that the Safe Connections phones are safe is because especially trained frontline workers are supporting the women to set up the phone and to maximise her privacy and security settings. And they're also including it in that, helping her develop her own safety plan. So here we've got a quote from Danielle. So Danielle was tracked on her mobile phone by her abusive ex-partner daily. And since having the new Safe Connections mobile phone and the necessary technology safety support and education from the frontline worker to sort of adjust her own privacy and security settings, she's actually not been located by her ex-partner and has now got a much greater sense of freedom and security. So without that technology safety advice, it's possible that Danielle would have continued to be located by her ex-partner and at risk of further violence. We hear this a lot, which is that women will ring us quite often and say, I've had 5 new phones. Every time I get a new phone, it's only a matter of hours or days and he finds me or he finds out what my new number is. The Safe Connections phone with some advice around how to do things and set up security settings may break that cycle. So the Safe Connections program is seen as is filling a really important gap in supporting women who've experienced tech abuse and family and domestic violence. It provides women with peace of mind and is seen as critical now to safety planning and supporting their ability to stay connected. And workers have reflected that receiving a Safe Connections phone encourage women first access a service and then remain engaged with the support services, which can often be another real issue. It's like somebody reaches out for support, but then you just lose contact with them. So workers commented that when women receive their phone, they're often overwhelmed with gratitude and feel valued and cared for. They have a sense of self-worth that had been eroding in the abusive relationship with their partner. So they're very grateful. Many are very grateful for the gift of a phone. And finally, the Safe Connections program has been described as empowering women against their predators, enabling them to regain control of their lives. Between 2016 and December 2022, we've trained nearly 6,000 frontline workers and others who support the women who are receiving the phones through that smartphone and safety training. And we've had the program evaluated and, 99% of the workers were reporting that they'd recommend that training to other workers in the sector. And it's the specialist nature of the training, which is delivered by experts in both family and domestic violence and tech, which was highly valuable to those workers, because you can do as much cyber training as you like, but you've got to be able to apply it in the context of domestic and family violence to be able to turn it into practice. So overall, the Safe Connections program is a really empowering program that's contributing to the safety of women who've experienced domestic violence. And after participating in the smartphones and safety training, frontline workers really feel they've got an increased awareness and understanding of technology abuse, and they also feel much more confident in advising women and supporting them to use tech safely. The training has actually influenced their day-to-day practice, as Jo said earlier, and workers are now having more formalised and targeted conversations about women and their tech safety within a conversation about their safety overall. Women who received a Safe Connections phone and technology safety advice express that it had a profound impact on their lives. So it supports women to remain connected to their family, to their friends, and to the support services, or to re-establish connections and relationships where they're socially isolated, and it offers them a sense of security. So that's the end of sort of how the program works. I'd like to ask that we'll break for some questions and answers shortly, but we just wanted to quickly run through some of the resources. So while Jo just runs through some of the other resources we've got available, and we will send these out to you as well, please get on and line up any questions you've got for us. We'll have about 5 or 8 minutes at the end.
Thanks, Karen. Just gained a small dog on my lap. Sorry, everyone. Otherwise, she'll just consistently whine while I'm talking. But I just wanted to go through some of the resources we have available so you leave the webinar knowing where to go to get more information, because we've just touched on so many things so briefly. Looking at this slide here, this is our technology safety website and a lot of the resources that are available on there. So we have our Women's Safety and Privacy Toolkit, which contains multiple handouts on specific tech abuse topics. So on our website, they're split up into different categories. So online safety, smartphones, general, and then under each heading, you have topics that are quite specific and handouts on just that topic. So for example, we have a whole handout just on password safety. So if you ever are wondering, oh, I think that's the issue and I need more information about that specific thing, check our privacy and safety toolkit first and go through all the headings there to see if what you've got a question about is covered. They're designed for survivors, frontline workers, and just for general community. We also have resources designed specifically for frontline services about their own tech safety when working in service provision. So that's the technology safety for frontline agencies you can see there. We have an app safety centre in which we completed reviews of several domestic violence safety apps. And we also have our legal guides, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail in a little bit. If we move on to the next slide, you can see here on the left, we have our safety planning around technology booklets. So these are A5 size booklets that includes a technology stalking log where survivors can record any abuse or stalking they're experiencing. And it also has just general information about tech abuse at the beginning of the booklet as well. They're available through the shop on our websites. They're portable, they're not too overwhelming. They provide just enough information to empower women to be informed about their tech and also to record anything that's happening. In the middle there, we have a dating safety guide that we worked on in collaboration with Tinder to assist people to stay safe while they're online dating. And then on the far right there is our WESNet 2020 survey on technology abuse and domestic violence in Australia, which you can also access on our website and is where we've been pulling all our stats and data from as well for this presentation. And in 2018, we conducted a national listening tour across Australia to understand more about supporting women and girls from Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander communities and also culturally and linguistically diverse communities as well. As a result of that project, it resulted in us publishing this simple language poster, Is Tech Abuse Happening to You, in plain English and also in 21 other languages. So you can access that by visiting techsafety.org.au/practitioner resources. And that's really designed to be printed off, stuck on walls, given to clients as well. And then onto the legal guides, which I mentioned earlier. So these tech abuse legal guides were pulled together by Women's Legal Service New South Wales, which is a state-based specialist community women's legal service here in Australia. They are designed to help survivors, practitioners, and particularly people working in the criminal justice system like police understand what legislation may be available to help hold abusers to account when it comes to tech abuse. So we've recently updated these to reflect legislative changes, and we've drafted 4 for each state and territory jurisdiction in Australia. And the legal guides cover the topics of domestic violence protection orders, image-based abuse, other relevant criminal offences, and surveillance. So there's a lot of information in these guides. If you have a client and you're working in Australia and you're unsure if something that they're experiencing, the illegality of it or the legality of it, these can be a really good place to start. And then finally, in collaboration with the largest bank in Australia, the Commonwealth Bank, WESNet produced a set of 4 guides on digital financial abuse at the beginning of 2020. And they're available on the Commonwealth Bank website, but also on our WESNet website as well. Often tech abuse and financial abuse are co-occurring or are the same, happening in the same space. And so we see so much of it that was why we developed these guides in collaboration with the Commonwealth Bank. So they're a list of some of our main resources. There's so many on our website. So have a look around. And also the Women's Privacy and Safety Toolkit is a really good first place to start if you're trying to get more information when working directly with survivors as well. And here is all the information of our socials, where to follow us online, how to subscribe to our mailing list, and our Instagram and Twitter and Facebook down the bottom there. And so that's it for the content of today. And now we have time for questions.
Great, thanks, Jo. So look, we're happy to we've finished with We have about half an hour still in our time slot if anybody would like to ask us any questions. We've got some questions coming into the questions and answer, and I may just read some of these out and I might throw to you as we go. So Grace has asked, are there any trainings for the United States? And if so, where can I find them? And the answer is absolutely yes, there is. And our sister agency, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, has a sister site called techsafety.org, which is the founding and the original safety net project in the United States. They've trained over hundreds and 100,000 frontline workers and things like that. So if you reach out to the National Network to End Domestic Violence, nnedv.org, they have got a dedicated site called techsafety.org in the United States, and they also have trainers, and they also train all of the national coalitions in each state and territory, and they have an annual conference every year on this particular topic. So thanks for the question, Grace. Margaret has asked if there's a similar program in New Zealand, and I'm not aware of a program in New Zealand, but we do know that there's quite a lot of similarities between Australia and New Zealand, and we often have a lot of people joining us from across the ditch to our paid unit or to our we've got some paid units of training in different topics. So we can make sure that we send out our list of training and events, and we're very happy to have people join us and work with anybody in New Zealand if they wanted to also have this kind of program. We've got another question here from Susan, and I'm not sure whether you have any information on this, Jo. Have we got any data on older women's use of safe phones or training and support? From Susan from INPIA.
I don't know off the top of my head, but when we do the Safe Connections program, we collect demographic information about who the worker is handing out the phone to, and they put in their age there. So we could definitely look into, the data in relation to age and who is utilising the safe phones. In terms of how they're using them, we couldn't kind of measure outcomes around that, but we could definitely see, ages of the people that are receiving them. Anecdotally, it's women of all ages based on my experience at WesNet. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Karen.
No, I mean, we've got that little graph, which I'm just showing on the slide here now, which has sort of got the age distribution of the women doing that. I mean, one of the interesting things that has just been found more recently by the Telstra work that Justine was referring to earlier about Australians' digital inclusion is that the gender divide between women and men, or between the genders, is shrinking, and that where there was a really marked difference between digital inclusion for young women right through all the ages, and it sort of increased with age, that has been closing over the past few years. And in fact, in regional and rural Australia, older women are now much more digitally included than older men for the first time. So they're still not as digitally included as they are in the metropolitan areas. So digital inclusion is harder the more remote you are in Australia. But we're very pleased to see that regional and rural women in the older age cohorts are actually, have actually overtaken the men. It's a very interesting question, and certainly we understand that, particularly with sort of hard economic times and a very difficult housing and homelessness rates here in Australia, and I'm sure across the world, that older women are particularly vulnerable. And so we may anticipate that we'll have an increase in the number of women who are leaving relationships and perhaps accessing phones as time goes on. We'll keep an eye on that. Great question. I'm just going to quickly check that we haven't got any other questions on the Hoover platform.
There was a question while you were talking, Karen, earlier in the chat. Gabriella asked, with the advent of smart vehicle technology with inherent stalking capabilities that can be accessed easily through web and phone apps, have you come across this type of technology-aided abuse? And I just answered and said, absolutely, yes, we have. We've seen this with location tracking and stalking. And we also have a handout on this on our website as well. And I linked that handout in the chat. But yes.
And I believe that the US technology, sorry, the US techsafety.org website also has a sort of a matching handout on connected cars in the US context, so that between the two of those, you'll get a bit of a feel, if you're not in either Australia or US, of how those technologies works. But yes, unfortunately, every time there's a new advance in technology, there also seems to be a perpetrator who decides to, you know, learn how to use that and sort of misuse it for abusive purposes. So I think we just unfortunately have to assume that every time there is a new technology, somebody is going to think of a, you know, cruel and unusual way to misuse it. Yeah. It is a little bit sort of hard to sort of keep up. But I think on the positive note, in terms of those types of advances, what we are seeing now is corporations who are developing apps starting to design those products and services with safety by design principles in place to try and make sure that they're not actually designing a service that is just going to fall into the hands of, you know, abusers and get misused to perpetrate more violence. So I think we've, you know, I've been working in this field now for 12 years, and I've really noticed that there is a much better sort of understanding of how, you know, survivors of domestic violence actually experience technology and all the different ways that technology can be misused. Also, you know, companies like Telstra sort of actually recognising that, you know, many of their customers are experiencing violence and may need specific support. So, you know, trying to design those. So we are starting to see a lot of that happen. I'll just give everybody a few more moments to either make a comment in the chat or ask us any questions. We're more than happy to answer any question at all around anything to do with this topic.
I don't think there's anything we've missed, but I've just re-put the link into the chat, which is the handout for our connected cars and driverless vehicles handout, as someone just requested it again.
That's great. And I know we had an earlier question from Tamara from Argentina. Very keen to find out what some of the academic research around this topic is. Australia is probably very, very lucky to have quite a large number of academics working in our universities here who really focus on the issue of technology facilitated abuse and its intersection with violence against women. And so we will be shortly creating a bit of a reading list of future reading for anybody who's particularly interested in this topic. And a good place to start is that second national survey that we did, which has many references. But we've also got some national surveys and other amazing work by academics looking at this issue. So it's a great place to start and find more information about this topic. All right, well, we'll hang around for a couple more minutes, but I will close the proceedings now formally, unless oh, here we go. Have we got a question here? Not sure if that was a question.
A question from Nina in the Q&A box, Karen.
All right, let me just see if I can make the Q&A box turn up here on my system with so many tabs open. So Nina, great question. What other partner organisations or collaborations would you like to see involved in this space going forward? And what advocacy is needed to support this work? Look, really relevant question. So We think that any technology company really needs to be thinking about who's using their service or their platform. And this is actually for any business as well. Like if you're a business and you're, doing something online, or you're delivering a service to customers, or you've got an app or a platform that is being used, then some of your customers or users are going to be experiencing domestic family violence, or other forms of abuse. And some of your users are actually going to be using or potentially misusing that platform to abuse. So increasingly what we're seeing is that forward-thinking technology companies and large corporations, and in Australia that includes the telecommunications companies and the banking sector, and in terms of technology companies, it can be the social media companies, it can be some of the rideshare platforms, for example, some of the dating apps, all of those types of technology companies are increasingly setting up what are called trust and safety teams, which specifically look at the way that their apps and products work for groups that are experiencing abuse or harassment within their platforms. And the ones that are doing that well are actually working very closely with the women's sector, or the LGBTQI sector, or the First Nations sector, or the disability sector, to ensure that the products and services they're designing are co-designed, not only with the sectors that are providing sort of support and services to those particular sectors, but increasingly also with some of the victim survivors from those groups as well. So, when you ask, what collaboration should we have, we do need to see more of those collaborations. We've got some outstanding examples of organisations that are doing that really proactively in the world at the moment, but there can always be more. And we do from time to time see, apps and platforms that just ignore it and aren't interested in providing that level of safety. But I think today's consumers are pretty cluey and quite often will be trying to call out those kind of unethical behaviours. So it really is, it's good for everybody. You get a much better customer experience, you're causing less trauma, your workforce is feeling much safer, and everything about your service should be better off if there's less violence. Unless you're a platform or a technology company that's, actually making money off violence and aggression, and I can't speak for those, but for most technology companies which are trying to use technology to help the world and to make it a better and a connected place, we are seeing those. I think any calling out what you see that doesn't work to technology companies is often really valuable. So wherever you are and whatever app you're working, sometimes people just don't get it. Classic example here in Australia was that many frontline workers had known for quite some time that abusers were just depositing 1 cent into the victim's bank account. And when you do that with the banking app, there's a little space to write a message. And they were using that space to write a really offensive message. So they were basically using the banking app as a way to send really abusive messages. Now, we knew that was happening many years before the banks worked out that was happening, but nobody had actually thought to tell the banks because they just assumed that the banks wouldn't listen. And I can remember vividly being in a meeting with the banks who were coming to talk about some of these issues, and they said, why did nobody tell us? So just speaking up and speaking out to any platform that you can to sort of make this known is also really, really valuable, and is some advocacy that you can do right now from anywhere. So Shanali, if we want to collaborate on how we can move forward with it at the Power of Women, we believe we can help. That's great. Shanali, please reach out to us and we'll try and connect with you. And Sarah H has asked, do you plan to partner with other telcos such as Optus? We're always open to partnering with as many telcos as possible. We know that we've got other material aid that we're also working with here at WesNet. One of the other programs that we've got is with Uber, who donates free rides for survivors. So again, we have a number of agencies in our network across Australia We've got access to free Uber rides to actually transport women from place to place. And there are numerous other types of arrangements and partnerships that we could set up between technology companies and the Women's Services Network. And we're really open to working with other telcos, other internet providers, a whole range of partners to try and just get support to women everywhere. Shara has asked, does Canada have this Safe Connections program? I know that Canada has got a new safety net project, and that we'll try and get the details of that. And I think they might be available on the NNEDV Tech Safety website as well. But Canada has got a brand new Safety Net Canada program. I think it's called Tech Safety Canada, and we'll definitely try to find out that information and how you can get in contact with them. I'm not sure whether or not they've got a phones program, but anything is possible, and we'll definitely try to connect you, Shara, with that program. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. Happy International Women's Day, which for some of you will be in 2 days, but for us will be in less than 24 hours when we wake up tomorrow. I hope you enjoy all of your attendance and all your events at CSW, and I look forward to seeing you in some of those forums. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll close the webinar now. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.